So welcome everyone. We are so thrilled to have you today on a Friday afternoon. It means so much. And today we're going to be talking about how you can save time and money with discovery sprints. And we've got quite the dream team to share some of their tips and strategies. And if it's your first thoughtbot event, a little bit about us. We are a product agency that builds and designs web and mobile applications. And we build first version products for a lot of startups and a lot of enterprise clients that are looking to explore a new technology. And discovery work, upfront validation, user research, these are all things we love to do to make sure we're going to be building the right thing for our clients and their customers. And today, what we've done is organized a group of thoughtbot team members to talk about their experiences leading these types of projects. So you have leaders from design, development, and product management to share what they do, how they do it, what works well, what you can skip, so you're better equipped to lead your own discovery efforts. At the very end of this, we will have time for questions and answers, so please submit any as they kind of pop up. I'll kick us off for kickoffs. Kelly Gibo, I'm an associate director at thoughtbot. I lead our BD efforts and client strategy work. And I'll popcorn Jason next.
Hi, I'm Jason Bailey. I'm currently a product manager at thoughtbot. I used to be a developer, so I might wear either hat when I'm answering a question. Give you a little perspective from both sides. Over to Johnny.
Hi, my name is Johnny. I'm the development team lead here at thoughtbot, and I do the development work. Popcorn and Vendela.
Hi, I'm Vendela, design team lead with our Ignite team, which works on the earliest stage products. So usually we just get clients who come to us with an idea. And Bryce.
And my name is Bryce Morisako, and I am the director of product management over here on our Liftoff team. Which focuses on building out first version MVPs and really, trying to bring products to life. So back to Kelly.
Thank you. And thank you all for making time to join us today. This is the dream team. So I'm excited to share their learnings with all our attendees today. Let's kick us off with an easy question. How would we define discovery work? No pressure. Who wants to go first?
I'll jump in.
Oh, go ahead.
I think it's important that there's kind of two sides of it. There can be sort of technical discovery work where we're trying to determine like what architecture exists, what problems might be on the horizon, what needs to be built, and then there's also the product strategy, market fit discovery work. What sort of research has already been done. What new things can we figure out? I'll let some other folks jump in and talk about some details there.
Yeah, I can talk about it. So I think the difference between discovery work and a normal design sprint usually is that we take, during a regular design sprint, it's usually pretty templatized. Of course, we try to adjust it to the needs of the client, but with discovery work, I think we do that even more. It's more custom, and so even the length of the time that we spend together is variable. And yeah, I think that's a big difference between the two.
And I think another thing, kind of just to jump on Vendela's point and Jason's point, is I think the discoveries work really can vary in scope. And generally in terms of, how long it could, generally take, but really a lot of it is, being able to do kind of a lot of the validation and kind of upfront work to make sure an idea is pretty sound, moving over into trying to bring some of it to life and being able to, get real feedback on that in real time. And then really trying to figure out how you go from, an idea to implementation, I think is another kind of aspect of how we define it in some ways or not as well.
I'll jump in too.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, technical side, there's a lot of risk, and my job is to assess that risk and find pieces of the puzzle and try to make it fit in a way that can achieve our goals.
I like that. Risk manager. Very important for new software. So what are the outcomes we would expect from discovery work?
I could hop in and then Vanilla, if you wanted to follow, I'm sure you could add a lot of really good stuff to this as well. But I think one of the, I guess these are a couple main reasons we really want to do discovery work. And, I'll try to break it down into four pretty easy to follow points for the most part. But I think one aspect is really being able to, validate an idea and be able to, rapid prototype and create a lot of different ideas. I think oftentimes when ideas are kind of in their infancy, there's a lot of different ways you could go, and being able to, systematically think about them, prioritize them, as well as, deliver on some of them, I think is, one of the key kind of areas. I think another area is really being able to drive stakeholder alignment and align a team around a common goal. Oftentimes when you're creating a project or starting anything off, that's one of, really kind of the most crucial elements to being able to do that. And then the last piece is really being able to, potentially have a roadmap or some sort of like MVP prioritize, where once you're able to go through a lot of the ideation, the ideas converge on kind of a common solution. It then kind of jumped into how do we build this and what team makes the most sense. So it kind of collectively pieces together all of, those different kind of stages of a product's ideation lifecycle, and hopefully brings that to life in a way that aligns a team, aligns stakeholders, and aligns a business.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Bryce said. The only things I would add, I guess, concrete deliverables that we expect to come out of discovery work are a lot of usability testing a lot of the time, because that's such an important tool for validating concepts. So having those results and documentation about what people thought of the prototype, or interviewing people, things like that. And along with that, sort of tested assumptions that we've come across during the exploration of usually the earlier part of discovery work and sprints too. We identify those assumptions, and then by the end of it, we've tested them and asked people about them, and done research, both technical and with users, to make sure that they're not assumptions anymore. They're either a yes or no.
And I have to imagine some of that research, some of those assumptions, yes, they help you understand what the product should look like, but would it also help just inform the business overall? Like I'm assuming uncover useful things that go a bit broader than just the product.
Yeah, I think a big thing is realizing which assumptions are the most risky. Some clients will come to us and say something, I'm trying to think of a good example off the top of my head, but that's actually their whole business plan is relying on this one assumption, and we don't know for sure yet. Maybe we feel kind of confident about it, but those things are really important to test. And the main goal at that point is identifying those, and then really focusing on having at least that one assumption tested, and everything else has to kind of fall into place after that.
That's a great point. Jason and Johnny, what about you from a technical perspective? What outcomes do you hope to have at the end of these types of projects?
I could jump in. So the work I do is when we know vaguely of what we want to build, I take the time to break that work into smaller chunks of stories. And I take my time to estimate each story. And what I give you at the end is a best effort estimate, a practical estimate, and a pessimistic estimate of how long I think we can visit most of the stories.
Gotcha.
It is an estimate, and estimating software is very, very hard to do. But we give it our best effort.
Yeah, I think in a very, very general sense, like what you're getting is the information that you need to make a plan, like the plan for your next 6 months to a year of your software's life. You have a lot more information about what it will really take to build the pieces that you're thinking about. You have more information about where the risky areas are. If we're really like this part of the piece, we know we can build it. Like we've done it a bunch of times, but it'll take a while. Maybe we work on this piece that is more unknown and riskier, and maybe we prioritize that first because it's risky. So we can start to do risk management like that, build it into the plan, and the same with the strategy side of things. We determined that this area of your business is like definitely something that your customer base is interested in, and this area is more risky. Like, how does that inform the plan that we're going to make for which features we roll out first? So like it's gathering all that information and really taking a deep look at it so we can make a really good plan.
I really like also the idea of you come up with the plan, but also you align the team on the plan and like additional stakeholders early, right? Like you're figuring out where you want to go forward, but you're doing so in a way that lets everybody get kind of buy-in. So there's less surprises, hopefully, down the line.
Yeah, it's all a conversation. Everyone gets to weigh in, and, and it's a complicated thing to do.
Totally. Yeah. That's a good question. So are all discovery sprints the same? And if no, what's different about them?
I would say definitely not. They're totally different size projects. There are projects that have a running business that isn't a technology yet, and they want to make it a technology. There are technologies that want to pivot and do something else. There are websites that want to have a mobile app. There are people who have an idea that's not a business at all yet. All these things have really different technical and like strategy requirements, so they can be different.
Yeah, I'll second that too. Like every client I work with on discovery sprints have way different requirements, and I find myself inventing exercises on the spot just so that we get on the same page. Sometimes the architectural work that I do involves running through existing functionality. And what I do is I usually invite CTOs to this exercise, and we work backwards to discover what the architecture actually looks like. So if you're a new CTO, this is usually a very, very fun exercise, and you'll be discovering things you may not know about your architecture.
From a design perspective, I can give a few examples. I had one sprint where actually the visual design was really important for testing purposes. It really mattered what this thing looked like compared to the competition. So we spent a lot of time on the prototype and finessing those things and actually working really in depth on the visuals. I had another discovery sprint where we needed a really wide range of responses from different types of users, and just really focused on validating the concept with as many people as we could within our time frame. So I think we interviewed 22 people or something like that. So most of our time was spent on usability testing, and we took maybe 2 days for the prototype. So even just that structure can look really different.
Yeah, and just to kind of wrap on some of that as well, I definitely agree with, I think, what's been said on the call, in the sense that discovery sprints can be kind of modified or changed really depending on the use case or what the kind of need is. I think another example is, on the projects that I think, Vendela works on, the Ignite stuff, that are a lot earlier on the validation side. A lot of the emphasis is, proving, does this have product market fit? Does it make sense to build? What are the areas that we should focus on first? Or, in some of the more lift-offy projects where, sometimes we're digitizing, an existing business plan or model. It's more on really trying to figure out what the feature fit is, what to build first, how to prioritize. And I think that's the best part about the sprint, is you could really tailor them towards what you're needing. You could do it at the beginning of a project. You could use it to reset once you've kind of delivered an MVP to get on the same page. But it's the flexibility and where you could plug it into your process, I think is certainly super conducive towards working on really flexible teams with, requirements that change all the time.
Nice. That makes a lot of sense. When does it make sense to do a discovery sprint? What use cases are good candidates for this type of project? think we touched about a few of them, but do any come to mind as good candidates?
I could jump in here and maybe just touch on a couple. I think projects very early into the ideation cycle, I think are, really, really good candidates to be able to, run through a discovery sprint process. I think being able to validate that something's a good idea, align key business metrics and being able to align stakeholders along that idea and being able to really focus in on the key area that you're trying to prove or validate or build around, I think makes a lot of sense for, early stage projects or really anything that's new for the first time. But I also, like, speaking to that, I feel like it makes sense to do sometimes when, requirements are just generally pretty ambiguous on a project as well. And I think we'll probably touch on it in a little bit, but just taking the time to align and get all the stakeholders on the same page and really, I think to Jason's point, put together a plan for what makes the most sense. That can take kind of shape all over the place. So little bit wishy-washy on both sides of the spectrums, but I think there's you certainly make a use case for it in, during all projects for in some way or another.
I'm just to build on that and to completely agree with you. I was jokingly going to say that every project should have a discovery sprint. But I really think it is just that it's sort of a formal time in a way to really step back and make sure that you have thought about things and planned it out and considered different possibilities. So really any project where it, you have, if like starting to the next second isn't your highest priority, then it would make sense to step back and just, consider for a moment so that you don't get halfway through something and regret it or discover something that you could have prevented later.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it might almost be easier to define like when you wouldn't need it. Like
Yeah.
you wouldn't necessarily need it if you already had a solid plan. Like if you have someone who really understands engineering and a product manager that's already built out the features and you just need someone to help you work on your project or something like that. Like maybe you wouldn't need this kind of thinking. But I think if there are any questions or anything that needs to be investigated or planned, it's really good to get this kind of team alignment.
Totally. Our next question, what are common discovery work mistakes and how would we help people avoid them?
So I think this is throughout the life of a product, but I think one of the traps that's really easy to fall into is just assuming that your idea is the best way to do something or the way that's going to connect with your audience. Like it's the way you want to be fed the information or the way that you want the program to work, but it may not be the way that your target audience or users would engage with it. And it can be really hard to get to the knowledge that that's happening and that you've fallen into that trap. And it's one of the things that the sprint can help with, but you have to be open to that.
Yeah, and kind of just to add on kind of what Jason said, and also added another point is the process does have prioritization exercises designed to really draw input from everyone that's participating and allow for ways to kind of prioritize the best solution versus maybe the person that speaks the loudest or has has the more the strongest opinion on how a direction should go. So I think that's being able to touch the process, I think, is also one of them. It always feels very ambiguous when you start, but I think more times than not, when you get to the very end of a discovery sprint, you usually feel pretty good about where you ended up, and generally you end up with ideas that maybe you had no idea were even possibilities to kind of start. And then touching on, I think one of the most common mistakes that I see is I think just having the main stakeholder and the decision maker in the room during those meetings are important. Because it's great to be able to get alignment with the rest of the team or some of the other people, but if the main leader that is in charge of the budget or is signing off on it isn't involved or isn't aligned with the rest of them, a lot of the time it does kind of lead to a lot of good ideas, but not a lot of actionable outcomes. So being able to really tie in with the key stakeholders that can really drive the project forward, and have, being able to understand their success metrics in the very beginning is definitely a really important to setting up a discovery sprint, or any sort of product design sprint.
Great points. What about you, Johnny? What mistakes do you see that you would want to steer people away from?
Not thinking of features holistically. And that I feel like is a big one from a technical perspective, because it's easy to say implement payments or implement Stripe. Yeah, sure, that might take a week. But what you may not think of is what happens when things fail. So like, what if payment fails? What if payment fails next month? Do you want to give a user a free trial then? Do you want to destroy his account? There's a lot of little things that might cascade into smaller things. And while you don't have to visit each of those stories, you do have to think of them holistically and prioritize them based on what you think is important to get out an MVP.
That's helpful. I have to imagine that goes a long way into helping you plan the architecture and make some of those technology choices.
I would add one last thing. These are two opposite ends of the spectrum, but I think one thing is kind of limiting yourself to the idea of an MVP, which is what we work with a lot of the time, that you're trying to think of what can the first version of this product be. And so you really focus too much on just sticking with this first version, and you kind of forget to tell the team or us about maybe your future goals for this thing. And then we find out later as we're building it that there's actually a future version of this that we could have maybe helped work towards a little bit during our MVP, so that the scaling up of it later wouldn't be so rough. And then the other side of the spectrum is kind of thinking with this grand vision that's so far away right now that it's really hard to get yourself to pare it back into something that's realistic and actionable today, and that we can do a small chunk of and test that piece. So there's a sweet spot in the middle for sure of sharing everything, but also being able to sort of think a little bit smaller and more realistically.
Yeah, that makes sense. How does discovery work inform technical choices?
I'll jump in for this one. Aside from risk assessment, aside from the deliverables that we do for the design discovery sprint, we're working with constraints, and part of the process of discovering what these constraints are. If we are strapped for time, then we may bring in third-party vendors. And in that case, we may evaluate vendors for you and put forth a recommended list of vendors that we can work with. Sometimes it could be through interviews with your CTO or through interviews with your technical team. We discover that we're working with microservices. And in that case, we can, whatever we build, we can attach that into your system and work with the microservices that you have. So a lot of the constraints inform sort of the approach that we take to building something.
Yeah, I think there's the technical discovery work where we would understand your architecture and how what we need to build fits into it. So that's obviously very important. But then, yeah, I think there's also the as we discover the features that are going to be in the software, architecting them out, that can be kind of done parallel, as the features are being sort of thought up and vetted during the sort of design discovery work. The technical thinkers can be thinking also like, how would we build this? So those are just two kind of like really high level ways that the work is informing the technical choices.
And
Also,
go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, I've also seen some projects where the technical discovery is actually like testing some of the stuff out. So like writing code and just testing out a simple, API connection or auth flow or something to make sure that what we're thinking would be a good user flow is actually possible with the tools we're considering, or a third-party vendor or anything like that. So taking the time to actually test it before you say, like, it helps to reduce when you're doing those time estimates for tasks in your Trello board or project management tool. You've already tested it in some cases, and so you can take that sort of time piece out of that task.
Some of the risk, yeah, because it sounds like there can be, once we have a sense of the features, there's that moment where we're coming up with the estimates of like, t-shirt size, small, medium, and large, but also considering, are there third parties that could help us get this to market sooner? What's worth building, what's worth buying, and doing some due diligence there.
There's often an opportunity to say, this is the fullest, most desired version of a feature. This is the easier way to do it. That's not quite as fully complete, but might be technically easier to implement. So this can be a point where you can start to like put those next to each other. Like, should we do version 1? The easy version, the cheap version, the low effort version, and then like when does version 2 fit into the desired sort of pipeline of priorities? You can sort of start to do some of that prioritization in this work too.
Especially for clients where this is maybe their first time building custom software, getting used to the ideas of like, there's different sizes here, different levels of effort here, and that just exercise of prioritizing sooner in a project is probably really useful too.
There are even places where you can maybe have like a human interaction where eventually when you've got 1 million users, you'll have software doing that. But for now, like it's just you typing something in. So, and that could save you months of development time, which can be huge when you're trying to test your ideas out.
Yeah, that's a great point. How does discovery work inform a product roadmap?
I could jump in and kind of give my 2 cents, and maybe Jason, if you wanted to follow, that'd be awesome. But I think one of the things that we've really highlighted, and I think like we were saying, it could vary depending on the project and what's really kind of required. But I think getting the upfront validation with, design, either low or high fidelity prototypes, being able to get user feedback, and then just really be able to kind of know if you're heading in the right direction, I think is so invaluable when you're really trying to start and figure out a project. A lot of the time when you are adding items to the roadmap, you're basing it off of assumptions, you're basing it off of things that you validate, and being able to really start the project in the right way, understand what needs to be built, understand what's validated, and what needs to be that minimum experience needed to deliver the value that we need. It allows you to at least have a lot of those conversations with the stakeholder to really figure out what the most important priority is. And some combination of business conversations, technical conversations, user conversations, all really kind of go to inform this, and help to really set the prioritization criteria with the client in real time, which is awesome.
Yeah, this is more of an engineering thought, but one of my professors used to say, first make it run, then make it right, then make it fast. And I think about that a little bit, like when prioritizing even sort of user features. You want to get something like up for people to like use, and then you want to make sure that it's like got all the correct behaviors. And then if there's any like scalability, efficiency things, like put those in last. So like that's a really general, obvious kind of way that task might get prioritized, but having the information from the discovery work like helps us like make that priority list, because like we're gonna like obviously the team is going to be building software, and it's just like how can we start to get value to the user and value to us to de-risk the fastest, so to like be the smartest with the time and budget that we have. So that's like why we prioritize and how the discovery work helps us prioritize the roadmap.
That's great. This is a good one. What happens to a client if they skip this type of kind of first project discovery work in general?
I think The worst case is if you well, maybe I don't know. One terrible case is if you just didn't do that kind of prioritization. So you just jumped in and you had an idea for like a 2-year long software build project, and you built it and it works great technically, but then you discovered that your users didn't connect with it, and you had to put another 18 months into it to make it into what they did want. If you so like we're trying to avoid that.
Yeah.
I've literally been on that exact project. It actually, thinking back on that project, one of the things we repeatedly would come back to during retros and just this feeling on the team was that we didn't feel like the features that we were implementing were properly validated. And it actually sort of demoralized the whole team, like beyond just the success of the finished product. And once we hand it over and say, have fun with this thing, working on it wasn't as satisfying and motivating because we didn't believe in it the way that we do with products that we've put in front of users with a prototype, and we know that they want it, we know it's going to help them, and everybody's really excited about it. So yeah, and then to provide a little bit of context as to how we got into that situation, it was a very unique product where there was a lot of privacy and kind of red tape around the product itself, and we weren't allowed legally to test with anybody. So it was a very unique case. But
that's interesting though, Vendela, because I mean, the title of this is saving time and money. And so we think about that means like building software, like save time and money in building software. But the flip side of that is also your team's fulfillment and feeling energized about what they're doing. And if they know it's going to move the needle for your business and your users, because we've done this work and we've chatted with them ahead of time, it's going to save some time and money there as well, and some morale probably.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, and kind of jumping on Vendela's point, I think that really one of the outcomes of doing the discovery work is really having a very clear and concrete why behind why you're building the product, who you're building it for, what problems you're solving, how this makes sense for the business and aligns with what they want to do. So really kind of knowing that up front and being able to formulate your team around those principles allows, one, the teams to get off the ground a little bit quicker because the requirements are clear and people have a good understanding for what they need to do, but also from a fulfillment perspective in terms of, knowing what you're doing, why you're doing it, who contributes, and how what you do on a day-to-day contributes to that bigger picture. Also helps with just having a really clear and concise, reason for what you're doing, and having that be, widely known across the rest of the team. I think, definitely helps quite a bit.
Yeah, that's great.
I'll add to this because this happened to me. And the client came to us and with the open source project they wanted to use. And they did not want to do discovery sprint, so there was no technical analysis beforehand. 3 weeks in, we discovered that this particular open source project was just not sustainable. And it put the client in a very, very bad position in that they would literally have approximately a year, maybe 6 months before it would be very, very hard to add functionality on top of this open source application. And we found out maybe 3 weeks into it, but by then we couldn't turn around because there's budget constraints and we just had to work off of what we had. So it is a risk.
Yeah, they can't feel good burning time and money in what might be the wrong direction. Okay, so bring it all home. What are the biggest ways discovery sprints save you time and money? We talked about this in a ton of different ways. So I'm going to challenge each of you to answer this question in a single sentence. Who wants to go first?
I could try and see what I could kind of come up with.
It can be a run-on sentence.
I'm just going to use
No
a bunch of commas and a couple bullet points here. But I think, validated ideas, aligned team and stakeholders, and a clear go-to-market plan are 3 ways that, they save time and money the most.
I think it just helps you save the money that you would have spent building the wrong thing.
Yeah. I like that, period. That's perfect. Anyone else before we move on to Q&A?
I think those were too good. I can't follow.
I'll try.
Go for it.
Figuring out what matters.
Nice. I should have made this like in a bumper sticker. I feel like we got to that moment, which is great. So next up, we'd love to hear from you what questions you have for the team. We have a few submitted ahead of time, and we actually had one come in during the session, which I thought, Bryce, if you don't mind kind of walking through this, what does a discovery sprint look like? What are the building blocks of it?
Yeah, I'll do my best to kind of cover a high level overview, but I think, Vendela, if you wanted to chime in, since, you're kind of the de facto expert here for all of them, I think that'd be a good follow. But a discovery sprint is really kind of a modification of Google's design sprint. The idea is that the design sprint really covers like a 5-day work schedule where, the first part is you work to understand the problem. Second is you diverge and come up with different ideas. And that could, take form of, sketching or storyboarding or doing something a little bit more visual that gets you kind of going in different areas. Converging is really around kind of aligning on similar ideas and being able to kind of prioritize and, get to a good spot and have everyone kind of feel on board. And then once you kind of have that, it's really on to like the prototyping and the user testing to be able to validate and make sure that, you're heading in the right track. I think where the discovery sprint varies a little bit in the design sprint is it is, built to be a little bit more flexible and to give a little bit more time. Running through and trying to validate, interviews and build a prototype that, it's tough to do in a day for even some of the best designers, and being able to have a little bit more time to run through that process, as well as transition, validated assumptions into features. I think is really kind of, what makes some of the building blocks of that. So more than happy to let other people to chime in, but I think that's kind of how I, think about the process and what building blocks I kind of have at my disposal in that toolkit.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. The only thing I would add is, while a lot of the initial understanding and diverging and converging happens all together as a group, I think after that is where we tend to sort of split. And we try to uncover a lot of things to then inform how the schedule goes for the rest of it. So we can, while the designers start prototyping and finalizing what the thing will actually look like, the developers have learned through our discussions and ideas so far what types of problems they might need to start validating and exploring on the technical side. And so it sort of splits that way. And then the usability testing might add something new that we want to consider. And then there's time for, kind of rediscovering that part. So it really kind of just takes the shape of whatever we need at that point.
I think often a design sprint is used like more as a template for like one feature, like one sort of small modification to an existing thing. Often, probably not always true, but and then we use these discovery sprints more often to validate like a bigger idea, like will your software business idea work? Yeah. And like Bryce said, that takes a little bit more time than sort of a normal design sprint, where usually that's used to like, could we add like this feature to this screen? It's like a little easier to vet than like, will your whole business idea connect with your perceived audience? And if not, like what could we change about it to like connect it? And that can take a little bit more time and thinking.
Definitely. Yeah, that's hard to answer in 5 days.
I feel like it's kind of in the name too, because a design sprint, I think the classic example from the Google book is some coffee purchasing subscription website or something, which has a very defined set of features. And it's really figuring out small details within that during the design sprint, like what are the designs for this thing? Whereas discovery work really is truly, like Jason was just saying, kind of uncovering the validity of the business more.
Cool, thank you. Another submitted question we had is, what fidelity of the prototype is ideal?
I can take this one, being the resident designer. I hate to say it, but it really varies. Like I was mentioning, for a project, we couldn't put a prototype in front of people that didn't look visually a certain way and with a high fidelity for one of my projects. Whereas others, it's really a wireframe. But my approach to prototypes in general is to sort of cram as much stuff in there as you can without being jarring and confusing people, but really testing out as many ideas as possible, because this isn't your final version. It's not the thing that's going to be exactly what you build. It's a chance to put stuff in front of people and get their reactions to it. So, you know, if a discovery sprint doesn't have the same sort of time constraint that a design sprint does, where we only have one day and the fidelity sort of defined by that time constraint, I would say the discovery sprint prototypes maybe are slightly higher fidelity, just because we do have a little bit more time. And, you know, with a new business idea, there is that whole kind of establishing trust and making it look somewhat legitimate that goes along with it. And I try not to let that fall through the cracks to distract people during our testing.
Right. So it really depends on the use case of the product. What are we trying to test for? And the risks we're trying to dig into kind of leads into like what fidelity is appropriate and how much time we have.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, it's possible that you could do like, you know, a paper prototype or really basic wireframes, but I think for those types of scenario, or the scenarios where you would be able to use those, is probably you have an existing customer base that already knows what your product looks like, and they can sort of imagine the finished product or something like that, where the fidelity isn't distracting.
There's less to communicate.
Yeah.
Okay. How would you handle like facilitating a discovery project where a team is hybrid? So some team members are in person, but some are remote. Would you structure the project differently?
I can start. So we don't run into this scenario very often, but I've heard successful stories from other people where if some people are remote, you treat it as if everybody is remote. So even if everybody's sitting in a room together, everybody might be on their separate laptop with Miro in front of them and be interacting on the board together, so that it doesn't feel like there are kind of private conversations going on with the people in the room that the rest of everybody can't hear. So you want to make sure you have a good enough, you know, microphone set up, and that people are really treating it as if they're kind of in a video call.
That's helpful. We have another question that came in. How do you educate a client that is very feature oriented and has all the ideas of what their product should look like in their mind? Is there a short version of this project that you would use so that the client can have a taste of it? Or in another way of putting it, if you had to choose one part of the discovery sprint to enchant the client, what would you choose? What do we think?
I think that's a really good question. And I mean, definitely a scenario that I think we kind of see ourselves getting into a lot of the time. I think one of the ways that's really helpful is, even if it isn't, you know, branded as a true discovery sprint, I think there's ways where you could probably sit down with the client and really trying to understand or unpack why features are being built, rather than, you know, trying to change the way they're doing it. I think being able to understand the problem that they're solving for, who they're solving it for, what the current process is, and, you know, then being able to kind of open up to conversations on, you know, are you tied to this, or are you open to maybe potential improvements, I think is a very, you know, non-threatening way to kind of go about that, where, you know, I think it shows that everyone's kind of marching towards the same goal. And really, as a new client on a project, you're trying to understand as much as possible. So I think that's one part. And I think in terms of like the enchantment side of a project, I always feel like the later days of doing the sketching and the storyboarding and kind of bringing all of the ideas together is always probably one of the most fulfilling parts for me, because you really start off the sessions trying to understand and get on the same page. And once you've kind of made it through a lot of that, you realize that a lot of, you know, the team members or the people on the call have similar opinions, or are all trying to solve the same problems. And that's kind of, you know, a big moment where I think people really either align. and kind of get on the same page. So I think, long-winded answer, but I think that's kind of how I would break that up. And curious to see if there's anyone on the, any of the other panelists that have other pieces of feedback to maybe add to that as well.
I have a recent example where this was the case with the client I was working with. They had all the features already drawn, actually. They already had put together screens, and they really just wanted to see it all come together. What I did to try to steer them in the direction of validation was to kind of have a session where I sort of played the part of just wanting to hear more about the ideas. And during that session, I was writing down everything that was actually an assumption, not a fact. And at the end, they were able to see, these are all the assumptions that we absolutely don't know yet that they're true. Don't you want to validate this and make sure that this is true before you go ahead and build this thing, because you could be at risk of XYZ. And I think that was really effective for allowing them to see that there's kind of no way to get around the fact that is not a fact.
Right.
And then I would say the sketching, I agree with Bryce. That's always fun. People love seeing what everybody comes up with. And yeah.
What's interesting is both of your answers talked less about there's this list of features that someone is supplying, but more about what's the context or the motivation behind that. So what is the stakeholder trying to get across? What's their fear? What's their worry? And to your point, Vendela, calling out like, hey, there might be some things we still need to get answered about this, list we already have. So doing so in a way that starts some collaboration there, which is nice. I think we have time for one more question. How would you tailor the discovery process if you're building a product for developers? What would you change, or would you change anything?
Well, you just want to make sure you have developers in your user testing group, and hopefully some folks with developer knowledge, like in the conversations about the features and the planning, as subject matter experts. Other than that, I mean, there are people too, so.
Yeah. Might make your job easier, right, Johnny? You can just tell them real talk what's going on. Anyone have any other questions before we wrap up? So for a next step for today, thank you again so much for joining us. We'll be sharing a few resources with everybody. Our playbook, which is in written form, basically everything we do, design and development wise, so you can reference. Purpose Built is our entrepreneur resource center. So a lot of good articles in there. So we'll be sharing that. We have a product design sprint guide that can help you walk through and facilitate a product design sprint yourself. And also, if podcasts are more your thing, we do an interview style podcast called Giant Robots Smashing into Other Robots, which is hosted by our founder, Chad Patel. And it's to talk about all things building great software. So we'll be following up with all of that. And I would encourage you to follow us, connect with us on insert your favorite social media here, and stay up to date with what thoughtbot's working on. We've got a lot of cool events where we're brainstorming and planning. So we want to do things that help everybody build awesome products. We'll also be sharing a really brief survey. It's only 3 questions, so I would please ask you to share some feedback with us. And one responder will be getting some thoughtbot swag. So look out for that too. Thank you again to our panelists. Great conversation today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.